The task we are going to complete today is conduit bending board demonstration. The task assumes we have a conduit bending board, 30 feet of 3/4 inch electrical metallic tubing conduit, and set screw couplings. If you do all of the bends correctly and do not make any mistakes, you should be able to do the entire conduit bending board with 3 pieces of 10 feet EMT. You will need additional EMT to account for any mistakes or errors. Personal protective equipment required to complete the task include a hard hat, safety glasses, and cut-resistant gloves. High visibility vest or shirts and fall protection may also be required depending on the situation. You will need a conduit bender. You will also need a tool pouch or belt that has a pencil, tape measure, level, pipe reamer, and multi-bit screwdriver. If you are using compression couplings and connectors, you will need channel locks. For training purposes, we will be using an erasable marker to make our marks on the conduit. In the field, you will want to use pencil, especially if the pipe is exposed. In the field, you are not allowed to have more than 360 degrees between pull and junction boxes. Begin at bend 1. It's a back-to-back 90. Begin at point A. Step 1 is determine the bender take-up based on the type and size of the conduit to be bent. A piece of 3/4 inch EMT requires take-up of 6 inches. Step 2 is determine stub-up height and make the proper mark on the conduit. Measure from point A to point B to determine stub-up height. It is 20 and 3/4 inches long. Subtract the 6 inch take-up from 20 and 3/4 inches. 20 and 3/4 inches minus 6 inches equals 14 and 3/4 inches. Mark the conduit at 14 and 3/4 inches from the end. Step 3 is make the stub-up bend. Once the stub-up mark has been made, insert the bender onto the conduit and place the conduit securely on the floor. Place the arrow on the conduit bender onto the mark. Place one foot on the conduit and the other foot on the bender foot pedal. Apply equal force with your hands and foot to ensure that the bender does not slip or rise. Continue bending the conduit until the 90-degree marking on the bender is parallel to the conduit. Ensure that the conduit remains in contact with the bender for the entire length of the bend. There should be no gap between the bender and the conduit. Use a level to check the degree of bend. If for some reason the conduit is slightly overbent or underbent, take the handle of the bender and slide it over the top of the conduit to add a little or take out a little bit of bend. After you have completed the bend, position the conduit so that the end is facing up and measure the distance from the floor to the end of the conduit. It should measure approximately 20 and 3/4 inches. Step 4 is to make the back-to-back bend. Measure from point B to point C on the back-to-back 90. It is 41 inches. To make the second bend, place a straight edge on the back of the first bend so that you can accurately measure from the back of the first bend. This could be a wall or the handle of the conduit bender. Mark the conduit all the way around at 41 inches. When bending the back-to-back 90, make sure to keep the first 90-degree bend straight up and down to prevent having a dogleg. Using the star point, make the second bend back towards the first using equal hand and foot pressure. Check conduit for a dog leg. If you have a dog leg, take it out. Measure from point C to D. It is 16.5 inches. Mark conduit at 16.5 inches. Cut and ream conduit at 16.5 inches. Put conduit coupling on pipe. Note, if the distance between the back-to-back bends is smaller, you will want to make the second bend in the opposite direction. You can do this by subtracting the 6-inch take-up from the 41 inches and marking the conduit at 35 inches. The bend would then be made by using the arrow on the conduit bender and bending away from the first bend. Bend 2 is a 4-point saddle. 4-point saddles are used when a square or rectangular object is encountered on a conduit run. A 4-point saddle is just 2 offset bends that are combined to form one smooth transition over an object. Step 1 is determine the height and width of the object. Measure the height and width of the object or obstruction. Also, measure the distance from point D to the front edge of the object at point E. The object is 3.5 inches high and 12 inches wide. The object is 28 inches from point D. Step 2 is determine the angles and perform the calculations. 4-point saddles are made in the same way as offset bends, except that the 2 offsets are needed to complete the bend. Although you can use a variety of angles, be aware that 30-degree bends tend to work best. We will use 30-degree bends for the 4-point saddle. Calculate shrink using the offset formula chart or the offset bending guide sticker on the ideal bender handle. When 30-degree angles are used, shrink per inch is 1/4 inch. The shrink would be 3.5 inches times 1/4 inch equals 7/8 inches. 30-degree offsets have a multiplier of 2. The distance between the bends would be 3.5 inches times 2 equals 7 inches. Step 3 is mark the conduit. The conduit will have 4 marks. These marks start closest to point D. Because the object is 28 inches from point D, make the first mark at 28 inches plus 7/8 inches for shrink equals 28 7/8 inches. This mark represents where the first offset will finish. The second mark should be 7 inches from the first mark. The third mark is determined by the width of the object, which is 12 inches. The third mark should be 12 inches from the first mark. The fourth mark should be the same as the distance between the first mark and the second mark, which is 7 inches. Step 4 is make the first bend. When making the bends for a 4-point saddle, make sure that the conduit bender foot press is facing away from the center of the 4-point saddle. The first bend is made at the first mark. Place the arrow on the conduit bender on the mark and make a 30-degree bend. Make this first bend on the floor. You can look at the bender head to see if you are at 30 degrees. Otherwise, if you are using the correct bender, you can put a level on the handle. If the bender handle is straight up and down, you know that you have a 30-degree bend. Step 5 is make the second bend. The second bend is made by picking up the conduit and the bender and turning them upside down with the bender handle placed on the floor. Slide the conduit to the second mark and rotate the conduit 180 degrees. Look down the conduit and line up to ensure that you will not create a dogleg. Use the arrow on the conduit bender for this bend. Place the conduit under your arm and bend it to 30 degrees. You can check to make sure that both bends are bent to the same degree by putting a level on the offset. Check to see if you have a dogleg. If you have a dogleg, remove it. Step 6 is make the third bend. Remove the conduit from the bender. Turn the conduit around so that the first two bends are now pointing away from you. Put the conduit back into the bender and slide it to the third mark. Look down the conduit and line up to ensure that you will not create a dogleg. Apply pressure close to the conduit bender to ensure the conduit is bent at the conduit bender and not further down the conduit. Using the arrow on the conduit bender, place the conduit under your arm and bend to 30 degrees. Step 7 is make the fourth bend. Leave the conduit in the bender. Slide it to the fourth mark. Rotate the conduit 180 degrees and align the conduit with the other bends to ensure a straight bend. Look down the conduit and line up to ensure that you will not create a dogleg. Place the conduit under your arm and bend it to 30 degrees. Measure from point D to point H. It is 54 inches. Mark conduit at 54 inches. Cut and ream conduit. Place conduit on conduit board and put conduit coupling on. Bend 3 is a 90-degree bend with a left kick. Use the smallest piece of conduit left over from previous bends. Bend the 90 first and then add left kick. Step 1 is determine stub-up height and kick height. Measure from point I to point J to determine stub-up height. It is 14 inches. Measure kick height. It is 1.5 inches. Measure from point I to point H. It is 18 inches. The stub-up height is 14 inches. Subtract the 6-inch take-up from 14 inches. 14 inches minus 6 inches is 8 inches. Mark the conduit at 8 inches from the end. Step 2 is make the stub-up bend. Once the stub-up mark has been made, insert the bender onto the conduit and place the conduit securely on the floor. Place the arrow on the conduit bender onto the mark. Place one foot on the conduit and the other foot onto the bender foot pedal. Apply equal force with your hands and foot to ensure that the bender does not slip or rise. Continue bending the conduit until the 90-degree marking on the bender is parallel to the conduit. Ensure that the conduit remains in contact with the bender for the entire length of the bend. There should be no gap between the bender and the conduit. Use a level to check the degree of bend. If for some reason the conduit is slightly overbent or underbent, take the handle of the bender and slide it over the top of the conduit to add a little or take out a little bit of bend. After you've completed the bend, position the conduit so that the end is facing up and measure the distance from the floor to the end of the conduit. It should measure approximately 14 inches. Step 3 is measure and bend the left kick to 1.5 inches. From the back of the 90, measure 12 inches and make a mark to bend the left kick. Use a piece of conduit or your bender as a flat surface to measure the distance from the back of the 90. Mark the conduit. As a general rule of thumb, go back at least 2 times the height of your kick. The further back you go to start your kick, the smaller the degree of bend needed to achieve the kick height. The smaller the degree of bend, the easier it will be to pull wire. Step 4 is bend the left kick. Put the arrow on the conduit bender on the mark. Make sure that the left kick is level. Bend left kick to 1.5 inches. If overbent, take some out. To take some out, flip the conduit over and step on it. Point H to point I is 18 inches. Place conduit against conduit board or wall and measure 18 inches from the back of the 90. Cut conduit on mark. Ream conduit. Place conduit into conduit board. Bend 4 is a 90 with a 10-degree offset. Step 1 is make marks for offset bend. Measure from point J to point K. It is 6 inches. Measure the height of the offset. It is 1.5 inches. Measure from point J to point L. It is 27 inches. We're using 10-degree bends because if you use 30-degree bends, the distance between the marks would be too close together and you wouldn't be able to get the bends in that tight. One bend would run into the other. Using the leftover piece of conduit, make a mark at 6 inches. We know that we have a 1.5 inch offset. We will take 1.5 inches times 6, since 6 is the multiplier for 10-degree offset bends. 1.5 inches times 6 equals 9 inches. Make another mark 9 inches from the first mark. Trace the mark all the way around the conduit. Step 2 is bend the offset. Put the arrow of the conduit bender on the first mark. Bend to 10 degrees. Look at the bender head to ensure that it is 10 degrees. Flip the conduit over and go to the next mark. Put the arrow of the bender on the mark. Look down the conduit and line up to ensure that you will not create a dogleg. Apply pressure close to the conduit bender to ensure that the conduit is bent at the conduit bender and not further down the conduit. Bend to 10 degrees. Check for dogleg. If you do have a dogleg, remove it. Use level to see if offset bends are equal. Adjust if it is overbent or underbent. Look down the conduit to determine if you need to add or subtract from your first or second bend. Measure to see if the offset is at the correct height. Step 3 is mark and make 90-degree bend. Point J to point L is 27 inches. Lay the conduit against a surface and measure 27 inches back from the end of the conduit. Make mark all the way around the conduit. Determine which direction the 90 needs to be bent. Use the star on the conduit bender for the bend over to point M. Line up star on mark. Put offset on the ground and bend conduit using equal hand and foot pressure. Use a level to ensure the bend is 90 degrees. Make adjustments using conduit bender handle if necessary. Place conduit on conduit board. Mark at point M. You could also measure from point L to point M and mark conduit at correct length. Cut conduit on mark. Ream conduit. Place conduit onto conduit board and put conduit couplings on. Bend 5 is a 3-point saddle. 3-point saddles are useful when you need to clear a water pipe, vent pipe, or any other round object that may be in the path of the conduit run. They are normally used on objects that are less than 7 inches in size. Although 3-point saddles can be made with 30-degree and 60-degree bends, the best angles to use are typically 45 degrees and 22.5 degrees. Step 1 is determine the distance to the object and the height. Determine how far the center of the object at point N is from point M. Next, determine the height of the object. These measurements will provide the necessary information for making a proper bend. Measure from point M to the center of the obstacle at point N. It is 25 inches. Measure the height of the obstacle. It is 2 inches. Measure from point M to point A. It is 46 inches. Step 2 is determine the angles and perform the calculations. The 45 degree, 22.5 degree combination provides a smoother appearance and is easier to pull wire through. We will use the 45 degree, 22.5 degree combination. We can see that the shrink for 22.5 degree and 45 degree bends is 3/16 of an inch for every 1 inch of the object's height. Using the 3-point saddle bend chart, we can see that a 2-inch obstacle has 3/8 inch shrinkage. To determine the distance between the bends, use the formula distance between bends equals diameter of the object times 2.5. The object is 2 inches high, so the distance between the bends will be 2 inches times 2.5 equals 5 inches. Step 3 is mark the conduit. 3-point saddles should have 3 marks made on the conduit. The first mark is the distance from point M to the center of the object at point N, considering shrink. Place the mark at 25 inches plus 3/8 inches for shrink equals 25 3/8 inches. From our mark, we will go 5 inches in one direction and 5 inches in the other direction. Trace the marks all the way around. Step 4 is make the first bend. The first bend is made on the center mark using the teardrop or rim notch of the bender. The teardrop or rim notch indicates the center of the 45-degree bend. The teardrop or rim notch is located between the arrow and the star on the bender. Place the conduit into the bender with the center mark aligned with the teardrop or rim notch. Bend the conduit to 45 degrees on the floor. Look to see if you are at 45 degrees on your bender, or use a level to see if you are at 45 degrees. Step 5 is make the second and third bends. The second and third bends are 22.5 degree bends. They will be made using the arrow on the conduit bender. The bender handle should be on the floor. Slide the conduit to an outside mark and rotate the conduit 180 degrees. Place the end of the conduit under your armpit and bend it down to 22.5 degrees, making sure to bend close to the conduit bender. Make sure that the conduit remains straight when you are making the second and third bends. Make the third bend by removing the conduit from the bender. Place the last mark on the conduit bender arrow. Line up the conduit to prevent a dog leg. Make a 22.5 degree bend. Remove the conduit from the bender and check to see if the 3-point saddle looks good. Look down the conduit to see if you need to add or remove bend from either of your outside bends. Add or remove from bends if necessary. Look down the conduit to see if you have any dog legs. Point M to point A is 46 inches. Mark conduit at 46 inches. Cut conduit on mark. Ream conduit. Place conduit onto conduit board and put conduit couplings on. Bend 6 is a box offset. Oftentimes, these small offsets are made without any measuring or calculations. The quickest way to make a 1 inch or less offset is to make the first bend approximately 2 inches from the end of the conduit that enters the box. Make this first bend using a 10-degree angle. Slide the conduit forward approximately 1 to 2 inches. Rotate the conduit 180 degrees and make the second bend using a 10-degree angle. Place conduit onto conduit board.